Welcome to Grognards of Gaming, and we are all together, the full panoply of Grognards. I'm Rob, the Grognard Dog, and with me as always are...
Miracle Mike.
Tom Paulie.
And JB, GM JB.
Fantastic. All right, so in our last...
Do you have a quorum, by the way?
What's that?
Are you saying before that we have a quorum?
Yeah. I think we only need 2 to have a quorum. I mean, technically I could just do the show myself, but that's no fun. Then it's just a Grognard of gaming. So in order to be Grognards, we need at least 2. All right, so the last time we were together, we decided we would talk about pre-made, pre-packaged RPGs, modules, that is, vis-a-vis the home-brewed adventure. So, I think maybe a good way to do this would be let's talk about the former, and then we'll talk about the latter. So, with respect to the former, with respect to both, maybe we could talk about the benefits of it, and then our experiences with it, and then maybe some detriments, and then we can move to the second half, talk about homebrewed, and do the same pattern. All right, so let's kick this off. I'm just gonna start the discussion off by throwing this out there. I think that pre-made, pre-packaged RPG modules have their place. They're not my cup of tea nowadays, but of course back in the day I loved them, and I think one of the main benefits of them, especially for new GMs and new players, is they're professionally designed often by the gaming company. I mean, almost always by the gaming company that created the game that you're playing, and they're written to offer a well-structured, balanced, play-tested experience, and so the game mechanics, the plot lines, the encounters are specifically created by the game creators to fit the game's rules and to provide a cohesive storyline. And the game's creators will often include people who are talented writers. So, what are your thoughts, maybe on that point or other points about them?
So I agree with just about everything you said about those. Also, the thing I think about when I think about them is it's quicker off the ground. It is, I want to go play this weekend, so I can go out and I can, purchase a pre-made module and go. Now, we've talked about different systems. Fate is probably a little bit easier to fly by the seat of your pants, but when you get the more complicated games like, Dungeons and Dragons or Champions or Star Frontiers or any of those, you can get, it's a little more complicated to run off the fly. So I think it's a quicker start. It's also good learning, like you said, good learning material for people who are just getting started. Now, all 4 of you are in my campaign where I'm using packaged material because I'd never run 5e for Dungeons and Dragons. And I wanted to get a better understanding of balance in the 5e rules by running something that was already more structured. So that's my thought.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. That I think that sometimes it's handy to start off, especially if you're not familiar with either a system or a genre, to start off with something that's packaged, and you can kind of go from there. Or if you want to do something low level and make sure that it's balanced for our group. I think that there's also something to be said for using it later on if you just happen to have a gap in what you've written for yourself and you want to just pull something in. Sometimes it's really easy to pull a game, an encounter or a full module into something. A lot of times they're written to be able to do that, to be able to just plop it right in the middle of an adventure, depending on the genre. So
that's right. What do you think, Paul?
Yeah, there's definitely an ease to when it comes to these prepackaged modules. Some of them are fun. I mean, we, back in the early days, went through some really good series.
Oh yeah.
And like JB said, you can pop stuff out of it. I mean, how many times has Eddie gone through Keeping Them Borderlands? And
Right.
it was always new and fresh. And until Steve caught on, it's like, doing this again.
Right. Yeah, they are easy to cannibalize. That they can be fun. Yeah, I mean, back when we were like 15, 16, and we didn't really know too much yet about how to tell stories. I mean, oh my gosh, when I think of playing Warriors of White Light when we were playing Star Frontiers, that was one of the greatest role-playing experiences I had. I remember when Mike, when your cousin Kirby was running that game, and he sent some of us outside. We went out the back door, and he kept others of us at the table, and he ran the encounter. Spoilers. He ran the encounter. I'm going to put my hand up while I'm telling the spoiler, and then you could silence this if you don't want to hear the spoiler. And when I put my hand down, you could turn the sound back on. But the spoiler is one of the main NPCs, the commander, in fact, turns out to be a Sathar spy and betrays the party. So we Kirby calls us back in, and we see the other player characters attacking our superior officer in media res. We come in media res. And we're like, what are you guys doing? And it was phenomenal. I mean, it was one of the greatest, that whole betrayal theme, hard to write, especially if you're a 15, 16-year-old kid who's new at storytelling and stuff like that. It was well put together, and so that was just a great experience. And I could think of a lot of really great games that we played that were prepackaged modules. I have to admit, though, most of the prepackaged modules that we played were kind of forgettable. I don't remember much about them. I remember that there was a starship under the mountain in one D&D module. I remember most of Ravenloft, because you can't forget that. But like
Is that the Barrier Peaks, I think, in the D&D one?
Yeah, Barrier Peaks. But like a lot of them were just kind of long dungeon crawls that were kind of prefabricated and not terribly memorable. I remember that Pat ran, what was the one? Chateau d'Amberville. And the best part, in my humble opinion, of Chateau d'Amberville is the part of the module where you go like underground or something, and the module just says, now you develop this. You create the dungeon. You create the world. And I thought that was the most fun part, but I may be getting ahead of myself. So what I'm hearing from you guys is, I suggested that these modules offer structure and consistency. It sounded like you guys were talking about how they also offer time efficiency for game masters, because it's already prepared. So, GMs can save considerable time on planning, and they only really need to familiarize themselves with the module and prepare minor adjustments, if anything, rather than building an entire campaign from scratch. I'm hearing that it's accessible to new GMs. Pre-made modules are excellent for newer GMs who are still like building their confidence in storytelling, that sort of thing. So I think that one other selling point for the prepackaged modules is familiarity for players. Some players just enjoy engaging with published adventures that they've heard about on online forums or on the D&D website or the gaming company's websites, and they know that other members of the RPG community are gonna be involved in that, and so they want to be a part of that, and they might just relish participating in iconic adventures. I mean, imagine being able to say 10 years from now that you played whatever the new Ravenloft might be when it first came out. Like that would be exciting. Just the way we talk with great excitement about, oh gosh, you remember first edition Ravenloft when we played it back in the day. So to be a part of a classic storyline or an iconic adventure that other RPG groups might have tackled could be a selling point. Now, I think that the flip side of that particular point is there is a potential for repetition. So since modules are widely available and multiple groups may have already played through them, when members of one group go into another and that other group might be playing that module, then the storyline is predictable, because you've already played it. That's one of the dangers. Or just, even if things pan out differently, there could just be the feeling that the adventure lacks novelty. What are your thoughts about that?
I actually had that experience when I first started. The very first group I was gaming with, it was in the middle of White Plume Mountain. And then several years later, when I started with you, Mike, Pat, Kirby, you guys did it as you guys progressed along. So I just kind of sat there and kept my mouth shut. Just not to ruin it for anyone. But it was still fun to do. I'll be honest with you on that.
Oh, all right. So that's interesting, Paul. So I'm not sure that I knew that. Maybe I did and I forgot that. And thank you for your restraint. What was it that made it still enjoyable, despite knowing what was to come?
Different characters,
Mm-hmm.
different reactions.
Mm-hmm.
So, because that group would react one way, doesn't mean you guys would do the same thing.
Right.
And I think that's what kept me tuned in. Because if it was going to be the same thing, like you guys did the same plan as they did back then, and that was like 1981 or something like that, then I would have been like, oh hum. But because you guys would react differently, you guys thought differently, it made it new again almost.
So that's a good point. So the game equals the story plus the players and player characters.
Definitely. And the game master as well. Because I did Star Frontiers Full Turnus with you guys.
Mm-hmm.
A few years ago, a buddy of mine in Australia did a play by email. We did all the Alpha Dawn adventures. And it was new. Because, again, new characters, different GM, different interpretation.
Okay.
And it was like noon. Unfortunately, the game, we were about to get into the Nighthawks settings, and it just fell apart at that point. But he's got other games going on that I've been invited to join. So
nice.
So now replayability is interesting, but I'm curious, and this is, and I know, Paul, you don't GM as often as maybe the rest of us,
right?
But have you ever played an adventure that you had once GM'd?
No. When I GM, it's rare. And in fact, you heard Rob and I talk about it earlier. For Wednesday nights, I'm going to run a Gangbusters game. So, yeah, it's coming. So that's going to be like one of my rare fortes to running a game. Yeah. So we'll see how that goes.
I'm sure it'll be good. If how you come up with characters' backgrounds is any indication of your, ability to come up with things for a whole game, I'm sure it'll be good. You'll probably do pretty good.
Thank you for the compliment, Liam.
You're welcome.
I was kind of looking at the rise in maybe a fall, who knows, depends where it goes, of Rob's character. Kind of inspired by Godfather 2, actually.
Yeah.
No pressure, Rob.
No pressure. Mike, it sounded like you... I'm sorry. Go ahead, Paul.
I had a concept for Rob's character within an hour of me suggesting the game.
Yeah, I was like,
And
oh,
it's
I love
pretty
that
cool.
idea. I'm gonna let I'll email you shortly with the character concept. Mike, it sounded
Yeah.
like you were asking if any other of us have had that experience. I'm sure I have, but I can't off the top of my head think of one because I very seldom run pre-packaged modules these days. Almost everything is from my twisted mind. So if I have gone back and played and run an old module that I played, it would have been decades ago, and I can't recall. How about you, Jonathan? Have you?
I don't think I have. I don't think I have. Like you're saying, you probably somewhere had done sometime, but I just can't. I can't pull it out. I can't pull it out of my poor memory.
How about you, Mike? Have you, Mike?
I have occasionally, and it's interesting to do because if you've run an adventure as a GM and you have a decent memory, you know all the secrets, and you have to not share them. Depending, and again, this is one of the downfalls of packaged modules is yes, they're broadly available, but there were times, I guess, even when we were younger, that sometimes it was hard because we'd all get the modules and we'd all read them, and then somebody would run them. So how do you keep it fresh? I mean, I have, and again, I said I'm running a packaged campaign for you guys right now, and one of the ways to keep it fresh is from a GM's perspective is change it up, keep the framework, keep some of the basic ideas, but change it up. Change up the encounters, change up change up some of the background stuff, add to some of the background stuff that you're doing in the game.
Sure.
So it's, a little bit different.
There's an episode of that brings to mind of the D&D episode of Community where one of the characters that everybody hates gets into the game and buys the module and then wins at the end.
Right. That's a great show.
There is something to be said for. I mean, it really depends on the game system, and I have to go back to what Paul was saying about how you can play and have a different outcome, but some games aren't as don't allow that as much. They're a little harder to pull off different things, and by having a structured storyline, characters, as we all know, we've brought up a dozen times in these podcasts, is that players like to take things in different directions. So with a module, there's almost a feeling like you've got to hit certain beats because the next page says so. You can't go down to the village and have an adventure down there because the next one's up in the castle with the giants. You can't go over this mountain range. It's almost like it's expected by the players that they have to do certain chapters, a certain order. There's especially with multiple, if you're doing multiple adventures in like modules that like come one after the other. When I was in college, there was a game that we ran that I remember one of the big critiques was we went from one game, one module, finished it off, killed the villain, the boss, and then went to the next one, and the guy just played it because that boss was supposed to be there in the second module, and so he just played it like he hadn't died. And we're like, wait a minute, we killed him off. It's like he never explained it. He was only doing it because he didn't really want to go to the trouble of. We were like, you could have just named him something else and just put something else in.
Yeah.
So there's times when either because of the restrictions of the system or the restrictions of that adventure or just because of the laziness of a GM that it's hard to do something other than what's in the actual module. So that can kind of cut both ways.
Yeah, I think it comes down to experienced RPGers, experienced gamers versus newer gamers. It comes down to how much experience you have with it, because in most respects, prepackaged RPG modules are more helpful or probably better for newer GMs and newer players who are trying to learn the system, or trying to learn the intricacies of storytelling, like pacing and that sort of stuff, and plot, how to develop a plot, which is different from how to develop a plot in a book, you know. The particular point that Mike made when he spoke last about switching or modifying encounters, that can help overcome the problem you were talking about, Jonathan. However, this is one respect in which one aspect of prepackaged modules where it actually helps to be more experienced. You know, a newer GM might not know how to modify an encounter without unbalancing things, and if you've got more experience, you can do that. And you know, assuming that you're not a lazy GM like the GM that Jonathan was talking about, you could easily, as Jonathan just said right off the top of head, just change the name of the NPC, make him a different boss, so that you know that you maintain continuity in the storyline. So, yeah, those are very good points. One other detriment that I might see with respect to prepackaged RPG modules is some GMs who maybe lack a little bit of confidence in their own improvisational skills or storytelling might find pre-made modules to be rigid, with limited options for customization, and really that's just because they don't see the opportunities for customization. You know, if you're experienced enough of a storyteller or a GM, I think you could find those opportunities anywhere. So although GMs can adapt the story, really the core elements are typically fixed, and that can restrict creative freedom a little bit, or improvisation a little bit, based on player choices if the GM isn't experienced enough to work around that. Any thoughts on that last point?
Yeah, I'm in agreement.
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah.
I agree. And again, I think it comes down to, like you said, experience, you know, more experience versus less experience.
Right.
And as we've all been doing this for as long as we have, it comes second nature, and we've discussed this in previous recordings. It comes second nature to us to shift gears and directions with the whims of the players. Just because we've been doing it for so long, and we're used to being able to, okay, squirrel, we're going to go this way now. So it's, we're used to it.
Look over here.
Here's something shiny. Kender, yes.
Kender, yes.
But it's a matter of experience. You know, it's. And I hate calling it this, but it's a good crutch when you're first coming up, or like I did.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I've never run 5e, and the rules are a little bit different than what I'm used to. So let me use something that's more structured to give me, you know, how many times early on did I stop? Oh, I got to go look that up because I don't know that rule. You know, or I had to think about it. There's no rule for that. Which again, this is how we're going to do it, and things like that. Now that I'm more comfortable, you know, it's not as challenging, you know, in the new system, and I feel better that I could go out and, you know, really modify this or go do my own thing. But again, it's they're good for what they are, but they're not all that there is.
Right.
One bit of basic advice I think I should, if it's a new gamer that's listening to this, is read the entire adventure. I don't know how many times when I was young and just started out jamming that I thought, oh, I know what the story is. And then, or you don't give yourself enough time. So you're like, I'll just read it while they're gaming. And you never have enough time because you've got to adjudicate all this stuff. And then you come to a point where like, you didn't know something was going to happen. or know enough to set something up.
Yeah.
And yeah, you can completely trip yourself up. And so, yeah, read the entire adventure at least once, maybe twice or 3 times, and just make sure that you know what's supposed to happen. Anyway,
That's
Be
fantastic.
prepared to jump around that module.
Yeah.
well, yeah, familiarize. You're right. You familiarize yourself with what you have to work with, and it's just GMing 101.
Right. Yeah. Okay. So that's an excellent segue into our homebrewed adventures. So I'm just going to be Captain Obvious here. I think that the most obvious benefit of homebrewed adventures is creative freedom. They allow the GM to craft unique stories and worlds that are specifically tailored to their players and the player characters of their players. And GM has full control over the narrative, the tone, the pacing, the style, and you can make the experience more personal and customized. What do you think?
Yes, and also there's that aspect where you can have kind of a reoccurring either a reoccurring villain or some kind of other supporting character or something that happened that the players do that causes them aggravation at a future date. There's so much that can happen. And one of my favorite things about homebrews is you can let the characters develop themselves.
Yeah.
Let them live a little, in a way, so to speak.
You can.
What was that?
No, I was going to say you can actually allow the characters help you build the world. Yeah, I'll go on, but I just wanted to add that in that Rob and I have had that happen, where characters actually make suggestions about what parts of the city should be like, or one of their NPCs becomes a major NPC in the game. That can happen really easily. Yeah,
And I in a lot of my characters, I leave those little Easter eggs there for you guys to jump on every once in a while. If you ever I'm short on ideas, let's do that.
Right. Yeah. I've used those a million times. I'm like, oh God, where do I take the story now? I know. I'll just look at Paul's detailed backstory and just pick a kernel out of there and build an adventure around it, and it's just marvelous. So yeah, building the world and also driving the story. Is you can have the players do both.
Right, and I think with the homebrews, I think I caught Rob off guard last week during our Rome game because he had something prepared, and I was kind of finishing up a scenario that we did earlier that I was exploring different avenues of revenge, and I kind of pulled one out of thin air on Rob and kind of caught him off guard with it a little, I think.
Yeah.
But it worked out.
Oh, it worked out fantastic. Yeah, we managed to get a whole session out of it. I let Paul's idea or the thing his goal drive the session, and I took the stuff that I prepared and I put it off to the side, and I said, next time we'll do that. This time we're going to do this story. So yeah, that was fantastic. It worked really well. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I'm one of those players that sometimes you just kind of have to let them go.
Yeah.
and things happen.
Right.
And I think it's kind of fun. I don't know about the game master, how the game master feels.
Oh, I love it.
But I know I have fun when I just kind of go off on a tangent like that.
Oh yeah. I love sandboxing with you.
I was going to say your type of player could be a GM's best friend because you can just go, I want to enjoy this scene for a second. Let these people role play for a second. And you can sit back and think and actually maybe come up with something that would go along with it. But I mean, that can be great. I mean, for a GM to have fun with what's going on.
Yeah. And I even did that for you in the Star Trek game.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, hey, can I use that character later? I'm like, yeah, sure. Why
Yeah.
not? And I try to help the GMs in that way. It's a little harder to do with D&D. I think it's because it's a lot more rigid, and I have trouble developing and coming up with outstanding character personalities when it comes to D&D for some reason. But even for Mike's Western game, there's seedlings there too.
Yes, there are. Well, I was going to say, so Robert, you have said many times over Grognards, there's a reference you bring up often, which is Luke Starkiller versus Star Wars. Okay. Now, when you've been talking about that dynamic, you are often talking about prepping for a session.
Yeah, let me encapsulate it really fast for the viewers who aren't watching these in order. So I call it the Starkiller method, and basically it's a reference to the early treatments written by George Lucas of Star Wars: A New Hope, but it was originally called The Star Wars from the Adventures of Luke Starkiller. And that was changed many times over years, and as he made contact with production companies and other people who had their hands in the creative process. And by the time it was done in May of 1977 and hit the theaters, it was a completely different animal. It was Star Wars, and eventually Star Wars: A New Hope. So that's the analogy is, when I come to the table as a game master, I have a one-page outline. So if there's maybe a 3 or 4 hour session, it's going to be 4 or 5 scenes. I'm going to have a one line to describe each scene, and under each line a couple of bullet points. And the bullet points are like info I want to dump on the players at that point, or things that I want to have happen in that scene, etc. And that is that is the default of what's going to happen if the players are not proactive. But invariably, the players are proactive, and that gets changed. And the end product is not that. The end product is Star Wars: A New Hope. It's a different story, but I always welcome it because then it's an interactive process. So go ahead, Mike. Go ahead and explain.
And taking that, like I said, most of the time when you mention that, you're talking about prepping for a session.
Yeah.
Okay. That, and I've seen you do it, and I've seen other people do it. Which is, and take that not only to a session level, but to an adventure level and to a world level, where, again, you can extrapolate that methodology in a homebrew where you can't necessarily in a packaged module. You can try, depending on how much you're willing to customize and tweak the package module. But in the homebrew, you have that ability, to, early on, here's what my world looks like. And here's the major things that are going on in the world, and then the players come in and impact that dynamic, and even, the politics, they do something that throws whatever the plot was off the rails. And then you can redirect all of it as you're going. And in homebrew, it's much easier to do that than it is within a more structured, as John said, a more structured, packaged module. You go to page 1 and the players are supposed to do X, Y, Z. And if they don't do X, Y, Z and you get to page 2, and well, that means that the adventure can't go forward unless I do something.
Right.
So you get some of that kind of flexibility when you're doing homebrew as opposed to packaged modules.
I agree. I think that's true. What are your guys' thoughts on that?
Yeah. Very much so. I agree with it. And
I mean, Paul, you're actually in the process of creating the Gangbusters game. So as we're recording this, you're putting it together straight out of your head, based on your own research. I mean, what are your experiences? What are the things you're experiencing now that are noteworthy in this process?
Right. Well, like I explained earlier, it's the rise of your character, right? It's like 1919 Philadelphia. You're this immigrant kid. You're in a street gang, and at this time, these kids that are historically, because it happened with the great in New York, like Luciano, Siegel, these guys are in street gangs, and they find a mentor in a way, and they come out of the street gangs to gangster types. Next thing you know, they're wearing nice suits, they're organized, and it's basically like it's a rise, like I said, rise and fall of your character.
Mm-hmm.
And when you sent me that background, really, so soon, there was stuff I can relate to,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of like the problem I'm having. Like, I already know how it's going to start and what the first storyline is going to be like. Where I'm actually having the trouble is, at the time, a gentleman by the name of Salvatore Sabella is the boss of Philadelphia. He was sent from Sicily to specifically run the operation in Philadelphia. And what I'm having trouble finding, because I'm trying to throw in a little bit of made up stuff and some history at the same time. So the part I'm having real trouble with is finding an organizational chart, because you have the government, the FBI, the prohibition agents were big on organizational flowcharts for these crime families.
Yeah.
So I'm kind of looking to see who were his underbosses, who were some of the capos, and some of the capos might get changed for sake of the story. I'm looking for that kind of stuff, and I can find organizational charts for all the 5 families in New York and the Sopranos.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't find like no, can't use that. That's not helping. And so, like, I did find some good stuff to use about Sabella.
So are you having fun with the research? Because for me, there's a lot of fun in the research.
Yeah, especially because being in the story, there's certain facets of history that I'm just fascinated by.
Yeah.
So, in Mike's case, I love the Old West. So that was fun researching that. Even got to consult maps from the 1860s for background information. The swashbuckler game, there's been some research into that too. So I really like organized crime history, especially the early days. Like, I'm good up until like Mickey Cohen. After that, I need to know just because it's part of the story, but it's not as interesting as what's happening in 1919 and the rise of Luciano and those guys.
Yeah.
So I have another source that might be able to help me with. I have a friend who does work for the FBI. I might have to go ask him, like, hey, and he's based out of the Philly office. Like, anyway, you might have a copy of a Sabella family chart. I might have to go that route at some point, but the research is fun. And like I said, I want to put in some history, I want your character to interact with some historical people and then some made up people. I really, what I would love is for you to get off on one of those tangents I go on, because it could just be so much fun.
Oh yeah, no.
But like I said, it's some of the history that's the challenge right now.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, we'll sandbox, no doubt. Yeah, I was. I also enjoy doing research, and for game masters who do, that's another benefit of the home-brewed adventures. I mean, there's nothing stopping you from researching things that might appear in a pre-made module, but sometimes it might be superfluous because all the information you really need to run the encounter in the pre-made module is there. And if you're doing extra research, it might just be academic. Also, pre-made modules seldom venture into the area of historical fiction. And I love running historical fiction games for Paul because Paul is an historian. I am not. I just sort of have a hobbyist's interest in history. But Paul is like educated as an historian, and so it's like playing tennis with a superior tennis player. Like you really rise to the occasion. So I know if I'm going to run an historical fiction story for Paul, I better know my stuff. And so I really do a lot of research. Like for the Rome game, I know Paul knows way more about ancient Rome than I do. So I literally created, what did I say it was, Paul? Like a 70-page packet of all of the stuff, background stuff about ancient Rome at the time, at the point in time when we're playing, so that I know who all the major players are, the major historical figures are, and everything. So, if you find that fun, not all game masters find that kind of stuff fun, but then you don't really need to run historical fiction, or you could just sort of, if you're running plain old fiction, you just make stuff up at the table. If your improv skills are good enough, you don't even need to research. So it depends on where your interests lie.
Right. And that's one of the blessings of our group. Definitely with you and Mike, it's been since 1984 that we've been gaming together, so we know what we can do with each other in those regards. So it makes it easier, to be honest with you.
Yeah,
having that that experience with both of you guys, where I know I can get away with it, and it's not going to be such a hassle.
Right.
I know that I enjoy a lot of the same things that you're talking about. I mean, I know that before Paul, Rob, and Mike were pointing out how useful, it allows for creativity in the game, but I think all the fun comes with the creativity for the GM anyway, before the game, of just making pictures, drawing artwork, making maps, making lists of all the different people who are in charge of a city, who they might walk into. I've been doing that, like you said, back from the beginning. As a matter of fact, I have a little show and tell, which I've been accused of doing in my games. Last weekend when I went to visit some friends who I hadn't seen mostly since high school, like in 40 years, and one who I'd only seen once since high school, apparently had been archiving all the stuff that we've been doing in high school, which we didn't realize, and had been saving stuff, and walked in with an envelope with just stuff that I had done for a Traveler game that I didn't even remember until he handed me the piece of paper.
Oh, wow.
Of maps, of star systems, and just notes of what people were in the star systems and what was on each planet.
Wow.
And cue cards with all different spaceships on it, which I just realized here I had done the Star Destroyer in there, even though it was Traveler. I'd done a Star Destroyer just for the fun of it and see if I could write it up. But all this stuff that I had spent hours and hours on, and I can recognize my own handwriting. So I know this was mine, but it was like trying to remember what I was running, because, as we've said, we're old men with old men's memories. But it is funny to look at something and go, I've been doing this. I've always enjoyed this about the game, is the setup. And even though this was a universe that they set up for you in Traveler, I was still writing. It's conducive to writing your own backgrounds and your own adventures. And I've always, Rob and Mike, we had a whole discussion about that, about what you, I think it was in props, when we were talking about props, of just enjoying making maps and making this, and just the pure joy of putting stuff together. And also, the sort of brainstorming session when you get together with somebody and you're like, well, what would it be like? I remember I had this with one person who I was running something with where we were doing a superhero game set in World War II, but how would that change things? And we by the end of the afternoon, we come up with a whole history of what happened, why the suit was like 1948 and the war was at a stalemate because we had we had nuclear weapons, but they had like evil supervillains, and then suddenly we had superheroes that we were trying to push the balance back to them. But it just, the stuff like that is just when you get into just the fun of creating stuff at the beginning, that's just a joy.
Yeah.
So I just love that about having a self-run game, or a self-made game, I should say, the personally written game.
As someone who's primarily a player, if I will say this, if it wasn't for the time that you guys put into creating the world, if it wasn't for that work, I couldn't run rampant doing my thing. So a lot of the credit for me to do that goes to you. For you guys who create the worlds.
Happy to do it. Yeah, this
give me that canvas to do it.
Right. This is kind of an interesting situation because usually, Paul, I'm talking about things from the GM's perspective, and you're talking about things from the player's perspective. And this is a unique opportunity for that situation to be flipped now that you're creating this Gangbusters game, because part of helping to drive the creation of your world and helping to drive your story, I was inspired in making my character by the film Cabrini, which recently came out about Mother Cabrini, and that her story took place at the time that your game is gonna take place, and so I wanted to work Mother Cabrini, Saint Mother Cabrini into my character's backstory, and so we did that, and that was a lot of fun, and you were like, yeah, great, and you sort of ran with that. And Jonathan, I'm intrigued that you were handed all of this research from years past that you didn't remember. I could just picture like a young John Bensley like sitting down and be like, all right, I'm going to develop the entire universe. Let me start naming some star systems and develop. How many star systems did you create, and did you do it all on your own? Or?
It looks like there were about 30 that I created there, and they were
all on your own, or did you have player input?
Oh, it was from the. I mean, I started out with the framework that they give you with Traveler, where there's like the 1 through. There's like a hexadecimal. A 1 through 10, and then A, B, C, D, E, F, or something like that. But you basically there's different attributes to a world.
Yeah.
And you basically each number has to do with like either a government structure or economy or the starport, how big the starport is. So
wow.
You basically of how tough the law system is. So I just had like a bank of numbers for everyone, but then I extrapolated from that. This is what's there. Like there's a mining operation there. There's a huge like cross worlds kind of city where everybody comes from all over the place to visit each other, like a Casablanca, and
right.
So,
oh, good. I'm glad that you built on the rigid Traveler system for creation of star systems, because the old adage: the more you tighten your grip around star systems, the more star systems will slip through your fingers. So, by the way, I feel compelled to point out that George Lucas got that really awesome line from Joni Mitchell. So, hippie princess folk musician Joni Mitchell, who is an utter genius. She was dating Graham Nash. They had a brief but very passionate 2-year relationship, and she broke up with Graham Nash, and she wrote to him in the breakup letter, "The more you tighten your grip around sand, the more sand will slip through your fingers." And I was like, George Lucas, you cheeky son of a gun. You got that from Joni Mitchell. It's not even in a song. It's like in a letter she wrote. It's like in a Dear John letter she wrote to Graham Nash. but I could totally see George Lucas, take glomming from that. Anyway, so all right, fantastic. So any other thoughts before we talk about some of the downsides of homebrewed adventures?
I wanted to make a point, I guess, role-playing tip number 2 for this evening. Anybody who wants to try to put together backgrounds and actually structure things a little bit, this is just one type of app that can do it. But if you use something like OneNote, which I'm going to hold up to...
OneNote is amazing.
Yeah, OneNote, and then you can go and just look up. So now I go to the next page, and it's all like NPCs, spaceships, planets, background, story ideas, the story so far, and episodes that I want to put into it. This is for the Star Trek game that I run. So it's very handy to do something like that, where you can just pull your phone up and go, oh, I know that NPC, and you pull them up, and you've got them right there.
Great. So, what a resource.
Really handy. Really handy type of app.
It's amazing. We started using it at work before I retired. So it's really quite neat.
Yeah, there's other apps like that they can use. I just happen to use OneNote, but I think OneNote's pretty good at that type of thing. So,
right on. All right. So then moving on to the detriments. Was there something else you wanted to add, Paul?
No, I was just saying another potential topic for the future: game masters as God complexes.
Yeah, we might have covered that in Toxic GMs, but how to avoid the God complex, maybe.
The world creation and all that.
Right. All right. So
bow to me.
Bow to me. So once again playing the role of Captain Obvious. I think that the most obvious downside of homebrewed games is that they are time and effort intensive. So you've got to craft the homebrew adventure with by making your own NPCs. You've got to stat them out. You've got to figure out the plot for yourself. You've got to figure out how the plot is going to unfold for the players. You've got to balance the encounters yourself. You've got to manage pacing on your own. And these can be overwhelming. So, especially for a less experienced GM. So, thoughts?
Actually, you can use the one to help the other if you have a problem with balancing or pacing or something, by just looking at how a package game is put together. Sometimes that helps, and you can just go off and do your own thing, but you can say, how do I write this up so that I can present it to somebody and that it makes sense? And sometimes I've actually just looked at prepackaged games and saw, okay, they've got a synopsis, they've got the scenes, they've got the characters that they think the NPC is written up over here, and I can write something up sort of like that and get an idea, but still I've written my own thing. So,
right.
So an interesting thing, and this is something that Robert, you brought up, as one of the benefits of the packaged modules, that is not so with the homebrew. It's not play tested. There has not been the first time you're bringing it to the table for your players to play is your play test. And I don't know. And again, I don't know. Robert, you were the Forever GM back in the day. We occasionally did it, but you were the Forever GM. You used to make your own folders that look like real modules and things like that. You've shown some of them on the podcast. But have you ever gone through one twice?
A module?
And one of the adventures that you have done, have you ever gone through it again?
Have I ever? So, this now here's a little confession. The Empire Club two-fisted pulp game that Jonathan and I round robin GM'd back in New York City back in the day in the 90s. I picked up the co-GMing responsibilities when Jonathan's original co-GM left the group, but the initial session was run by Jonathan's original co-GM, and then Jonathan did episode 2. And then they alternated accordingly, and I came in at like episode 20 or something. I have run that for other gaming groups.
There was another gaming group?
Over the years. I have run that. I've run it most recently for Paul. The whole New Year's Eve 1933 to 1934 New Year's Eve party at the New York City Empire Museum, Empire Club New Year's party. I've done that. That's been the springboard, and it has gone in different directions very quickly. Like I only did one session of that for Paul, and by mid-session it was already in another direction. It was already vastly different. But when I ran it for another gaming group, my plan was to run an Empire Club campaign for them, and I started with Tom's episode 1, and I might even have done your episode 2, and then by episode 3 or 4 it was starting to go in a different direction because they had different characters. So yeah, absolutely, I've reused. Oh my goodness, one of my favorite. I love Cowboy Bebop. That is perhaps my favorite anime. And my favorite episode of Cowboy Bebop, and I'm talking about the cartoon, not that garbage live action one that Netflix put out. My favorite episode of Cowboy Bebop was the 2-parter Jupiter Jazz, and I love that so much. It is such moving storytelling that I've just run that 2-part episode in various RPG genres. I've just used that storyline over and over and over. I've run it for you, Mike. I've run it for you, Paul. I've run it. I was a player in a Star Wars game that you ran, Jonathan, where my player's backstory and which helped you develop your session plot. What was Jupiter Jazz? I mean, everybody here involved, whether you know it or not, Jupiter Jazz has been a part of our gaming, our combined games.
Watch.
Yeah, you gotta watch it.
I've actually run a couple because I do simply by benefit of having run in at conventions and have run the same story several times, and actually a couple years in a row I ran a story in a Star Trek game that went in completely different directions just from like a 4-hour convention slot, which was interesting. Actually, I and not only did that, but I ran 2 games that were connected to each other. The storyline went on, and ran it with different people, and that is interesting. But I think more interesting than that is I played in a game playing a different character in the same. Brennan White does Bulldogs, and he has one episode of Bulldogs that he runs, one game that he's run like 2 or 3 times that I know, and I played different characters in the same game, and they just go off in different directions completely, or the characters handle them completely differently. So, and it's a lot of fun sometimes to do that too, to just see what's. I don't know if that was prepackaged or not. I mean, I'm not sure if that matters because he's one of the people who actually wrote the game. So, by virtue of him being one of the original authors, it is a prepackaged one. It's one that is officially a Bulldogs game. But so no, that it can be a lot of fun to see what tangent people go off on and what different decisions they make depending on what the characters are and what type of players you have. Right. That can be a lot of fun. But I think we've gotten off the tack of what disadvantages we have from build adventures. Yeah. Oh, right. I think that it's been said though already that sometimes the freedom is a problem because you've got so much to put together. And you can put together, and I think we've answered there's a problem that we've actually answered in one of the other shows, which is your idea of the Star Killer theory of putting together a game, because sometimes you have so much background that you put in that like a ton of it gets wasted because nobody ever goes near it. And you put it together and you're kind of like, a little depressed. But if you go at a game with these 5 things and this is what I'm going to run, and if they come up with something else, it's going to be improv, and you just expect it, that can actually answer that problem. You kind of put structure in the freedom.
It can.
And
also
freedom and responsibility.
Freedom and responsibility. Also, nothing. I don't see anything. I don't see anything as ever being wasted, because if it's not used, it just goes in my back pocket and it comes out later. So
again, a Star Wars reference. The whole thing with Cloud City was supposed to be in the first movie, yes, and he just cut it out and put it in the second movie. You know, when he didn't even realize it was going to be a second movie, but eventually it just ended up someplace else.
That's right. So, and another Star Wars analogy we can make is a lot of people say that because George had so much creative freedom in making the prequel trilogy, it wasn't as tight and smart as the original trilogy. I mean, that's a matter of opinion, I think, but I think that there is some validity to that. That sometimes the limitations can actually improve, because you're forging your sword in a hotter forge. You're in a crucible. Whereas if you've got too much freedom, you could go in any direction.
There's a lot of people who believe that Hollywood, when it originally had a lot of the haze, well, I don't completely believe this, but there was a different effect on films because of Hollywood mores, but also because of like moral decisions made by other groups in Hollywood, that you had to find your way around a problem. It was a challenge to them to actually, figure out, I can't show the woman's belly button in this scene. So what do? Okay, well, the guy comes in Notorious. Cary Grant just puts his handkerchief around her, like covering it, like, for some whimsical reason. But there's all sorts of things where you have to figure out how to get around a restriction.
Yeah.
And it's like a challenge, and challenge accepted in some cases, and you end up with something funnier or something nobody would have thought of.
Right. Mike, you looked like you wanted to say something.
So, and it interests me because one of the other downfalls with the homegrown piece. Okay, so you look at some of the packaged modules, and there are years and years, and you talked about this about research, but there are years and years of lore and background and things of that nature, which is, how do you build your lore? Do you do pieces at a time? How much do you build in advance? These are challenges when you're doing a homegrown. When you're doing historical fiction, like we have with some different things, there's material there. If you're doing something truly original, and I'll give you an example, which if I would guess is where that Jupiter Jazz thing came in, is probably our Blade Runner game.
Yep.
Would be where I guess is where it came in.
Yep.
Where, and for people, it's not the Blade Runner movie. It's the original concept of Blade Runner, which we've talked about before.
Right. The book.
But it's dystopian future. Where does your lore come from? Do you borrow it? Do you engineer it? Do you make it up as you go along and just keep track? That's one of the challenges. I'm not asking you how. We can talk about how some other time, but those are the challenges, the things. You've got more plates spinning, more balls in the air when you're doing a home brew, because you have, and I'll say this, at the beginning, okay? If you're building a world at the beginning, you've got all that balancing act that you got to take care of. If you run this many, many times for many years, you'll have that foundation built by that time. But in the beginning, it's harder to get started than you would have with the prepackaged stuff.
Yeah. Yep. All great points. All right, I'm just going to summarize, and we can wrap this. So I think pre-made modules, they based on what we've discussed, they provide structure, ease of use, reliable gameplay balance. This makes them ideal for time-pressed or newer GMs. They're great for quick setup, running classic adventures, and providing a consistent experience. Homebrewed adventures, they offer complete creative control and adaptability, but they require more preparation, creativity, and game design skills. They allow GMs to craft highly personalized stories and respond more dynamically to player actions. Did I miss anything?
No.
I think that's it. So ultimately, you know, the choice between pre-made modules and homebrewed adventures, it really depends on the GM's experience, the time the GM can dedicate to preparation, and the preferences of the gaming group. Both approaches offer unique benefits and challenges, with neither really being superior, just different in their delivery of the RPG experience. So,
and I think we pointed out too that it can actually be both. Maybe there isn't a decision that has to be made. They can use both at the same time.
¿Por qué no los dos?
Righto. So, all right. Well, I think that's a good place to end this. And so that thanks for your thoughts, gentlemen. And I think that was a really, really enlightening conversation. So, let's think about what we might do for next time. Paul, I think it might be your turn to pick a topic for next time. What do you think from our pre-packaged list that we have?
I've been thinking about it, and I think a very good direction to go would be Session Zeros, because I have my views on them, and I know that you guys disagree with some of those views, so let's talk it out.
Yeah, that'll make for a lively, I think, a lively discussion. All right, so what do you guys think? Session 0 next time?
Session 0.
All right, very good. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning in and joining us for this panel discussion. And tune in next time on Grognards of Gaming, when the Grognards will be discussing Session 0. All right, thanks everybody, and see you next time.
Happy gaming.